Little Red Riding Hood was a 17th century European tale that was told as a warning to young children about talking to strangers. The story goes that Little Red would travel through the woods to deliver a basket of baked goods and wine to her sick grandmother. She ends up talking to a strange wolf and divulges information about her grandmother's cottage. In most recent adaptations, the wolf locks the grandmother in a closet and tries to eat Red Riding Hood, but is finally defeated by a huntsman. In earlier versions of the story, as far back as the 10th century, the wolf actually devours the grandmother. He sets out a plate of her flesh and pours some of her blood in a wine glass. When Red arrives at the cottage, the disguised wolf offers her the meal, and she unwittingly cannibalizes her own grandmother. Then the wolf tells Red to get completely naked and get in bed with him. After she does, he eats her too, and the story ends there. In the grim version, entitled Little Red Cap, the wolf swallows them both whole. A passing huntsman cuts open the sleeping wolf's belly with a pair of scissors, and the two ladies jump out fully intact and unharmed. Then they fill the wolf's stomach with heavy stones. When the wolf tries to get up, he collapses, dies, and is then skinned by the huntsman. Disney's 1959 film Sleeping Beauty is about a princess who is persecuted by an evil sorceress. She pricks her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and is cursed to stay asleep for eternity. In the end, a prince wakes her with a kiss, and they live happily ever after. But that story pales in comparison to a much earlier version by Giambattista Basile, entitled Sun, Moon, and Talia. In this version, instead of pricking her finger on a spinning wheel, Talia gets a splinter of flax stuck underneath her fingernail and falls into an enchanted sleep. A king that is hunting nearby unsuccessfully tries to wake her up. He takes this opportunity to rape her. He flees the scene, and 9 months later she bears 2 children, all while still asleep. One of the infants tries to get milk from her nipple, but instead sucks the flax from her finger. With the flax removed, the spell is broken, and the princess wakes up. The king returns with the intentions of raping her again, but instead finds her awake. They fall in love. When his jealous wife, the queen, secretly kidnaps Talia and her children, she tries to kill and eat the babies. The queen makes Talia strip naked before she is carried to be burned alive. The king arrives just in time to intervene, and then has the jealous queen burned at the stake. European folktale Cinderella is the story of a young maiden who is enslaved and tormented by her stepmother and evil sisters. While this is going on, a prince invites all of the eligible women of his province to a royal ball, where he then meets Cinderella. She vanishes into the night, leaving only a glass slipper behind. The prince tries the slipper on all of the women in the kingdom until he finds her. From the early 1800s, the William and Jacob Grimm adaptation of this story, entitled Aschenputtel, is bloody, cruel, and disturbing. In one part of the tale, Cinderella grows a full-size hazel tree over the grave of her deceased mother, using only her grief-stricken tears to water the plant. Later on in the story, when the prince is searching for the owner of the slipper, the stepmother persuades her daughters to mutilate their feet in an attempt to fit the shoe. One stepsister slices off her big toe, the other cuts off the back of her heel. The prince is not fooled, as he notices blood running from the slipper and up their white stockings. Cinderella ends up marrying the prince, and on her wedding day, she orders 2 doves to peck out the eyes of her sisters, leaving them both blind. Some literary scholars believe that the act of trying on the slipper is a metaphor for something more erotic. They state that the prince traveled the land to have sex with all the fair maidens, looking for the perfect fit. Hans Christian Andersen's Danish fairy tale The Little Mermaid was first published in 1837. Although it has spawned a slew of remakes, including the 1989 Disney animation, there is no happy ending in the original. As the story goes, the Little Mermaid wanted to be with a prince that she saved from drowning. She meets with a sea witch to acquire a potion that will turn her into a human. The sorceress warns that every step she takes on land will feel like walking on sharp blades, slicing into her feet. She will also have to give up speaking. In addition to all of this, if the prince marries another woman, the Little Mermaid will turn into sea foam and cease to exist. The Little Mermaid agrees to the terms, and the sea witch abruptly cuts out her tongue, leaving a bloody stump. On land, the Little Mermaid charms the prince by dancing, the whole while enduring excruciating pain at every step. The prince deems the relationship between them as strictly platonic and plans to marry another woman. Heartbroken and fearful of death, she seeks the help of her sisters. They receive an enchanted blade from the same sea witch. If the Little Mermaid uses it to kill the prince and spills his blood on her feet, she will become a mermaid again. Unable to go through with the murder, she throws herself into the sea and becomes a ghostly spirit that roams the earth for 300 years. Snow White is an old German fairy tale that was first published by William and Jacob Grimm in 1812. It's really a story of murder, torture, and pedophilia. In the earliest version, Snow White is remarkably only about 7 to 10 years old during the entire span of events. Her own mother, not stepmother, tries to kill her 4 times out of jealousy of her daughter's beauty. In her first act of murder, she orders a huntsman to dispose of her body in the woods and bring back the liver and lungs as proof. She plans on cannibalizing her own 7-year-old daughter. After being fooled by the huntsman, she puts on a disguise and tries to kill Snow White herself, once with a tightly bound corset, once with a poison comb, and lastly, with a poison apple. Although Snow White is in a state of suspended animation, the 7 dwarves fear that she is dead and put her in a glass coffin. A traveling prince is enamored by the young Snow White's beauty and convinces the dwarves to let him take the coffin back to his palace. After Snow White wakes up, she immediately marries the prince. At the wedding, her mother is forced to step into iron shoes that had been cooking in a fire and then dance until she falls down dead.